Hey guys, Bump here, bringing you this Myth Plus commentary and chat about the Unholy Death Knight. We got some tuning that happened recently, and we got some questions that I feel like I want to answer. Essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick look at what the changes are. We're going to take a look at the list of Q&A, or like frequently asked questions that I'm going to go through. And then we're also going to have a run that we're going to do commentary on. To start off, we have here, this is a plus 15 Rookery. I'm running the standard no apocalypse build. I put it on the screen so you can see it. And this is pretty much what I run on every single dungeon. Like, I don't swap it around, ever. Just to start off with that. Anyway, so starting out with some changes and tuning. We have some nerfs to Unholy and some buffs to Frost. So for Unholy, we have a Blood Beast nerf. We have that the damage stored translates into 20% damage instead of 25. So that it stores up some damage, and then instead of 25% of that exploding and dealing AoE damage, it's now 20%. Even though that's like a 5 percentile nerf, it's actually a 20% nerf overall. It is significant, but also not. Like if you look at your standard big pool dungeon, this is going to translate to maybe 2.5%-ish overall damage decrease. It's like if you do 5 million overall, you're going to do 4.875. So you lose some damage, but it's not that much. And honestly, I think it's quite fair. Blood Beast is like an insane spell when it procs in the correct spot. So nerfing it, it's fine. I don't think it's going to change our spot in the meta. Like 2.5%, it's kind of whatever, if I'm going to be honest. We also have some Frost buffs, specifically Deathbringer, Exterminate, buffed, Wave of Souls, buffed, Reaper's Mark, buffed. We're going to have to wait to see exactly the impact here, but I think we're actually going to start running Deathbringer instead of the Ride of the Apocalypse that has been kind of the meta in the current patch. I think we're still going to run Shattering builds, but if you look at Sims at least, Deathbringer is now definitely ahead by a couple of percent. So I think we're going to see people swap over and get back to the good old casino rolling spec. If you're not familiar, Deathbringer, it has a significant amount of RNG because the Reaper's Mark can proc off itself. So you can get this kind of chains of Reaper's Marks, which means you do so much damage. Anyway, those are the changes. Overall, I think it's fair. Unholy got a nerf on a Blood Beast. It doesn't impact us that much, but hopefully we're off the radar now. And I think we're still going to be better. Frost, obviously, they got buffed. I think highest Simming Frost is now higher than before. It was obviously Rider before, but now it's Deathbringer. So you got a couple of percent, which is quite nice. So we'll see if people are going to swap over and play the Deathbringer. I think as well, this is going to make Breath a lot more viable because Breath synergizes much better with Deathbringer. But we'll see. I think in Raid, Breath doesn't quite fit this current patch, so we might see it more in Myth class, but I think it's going to be like wait and see. Do try it out, see what you think, but I can't say for sure at this point in time. All right, so those were the kind of chat about changes. Let's look at the frequently asked questions. I've got like loads of these, so hopefully if you watch some of the other videos and go, this thing wasn't very clear, or that thing wasn't very clear, I hope that will be answered in this video, essentially. So first one, the biggie one. When do I use Epidemic versus Death Call? I see these loads and loads. So the reason this comes up is because like previously, Epidemic was the AoE spell, and you would just press that all the time in AoE. However, with the current patch, we're running Shan Lane, which synergizes really well with Death Call. And you pick up like all the Death Call increasing abilities, which means that it just does so much damage. Now, if we look at the reason this ends up being a bit more complicated is because like there's multiple factors come into play here. So if you start with purely looking at damage per execute, all right, what are the numbers? It turns out that at 6 targets, hitting Death Call is almost exactly the same as hitting Epidemic, right? When you look at like the total damage. And then at 7 targets, you got Epidemic being better. This is it inside of Dark Transformation. That's important. So inside Dark Transformation it matters because Sen Lane buffs Death Call inside Dark Transformation. So outside you're looking at Epidemic being better at 5 targets. Now the reason that this is not like straightforward is because of two things. One, Death Call does significantly more priority damage. So if you're in a pack and there's like a big mob, think about, for instance, Floodgate. You got these like dudes that do the flamethrower ability. They have lots and lots more health than all the other mobs. So hitting Deathcore on those is very good priority damage, and it's actually going to be better than hitting Epidemic. Even though you deal less overall, you're going to do more useful damage in a sense. The second effect here is the fact that we have a thing called Death Rot. So this stacks up when you use both Epidemic and Death Call, but importantly, Epidemic stacks it up on all targets. It increases your shadow damage. So even though like Death Call could be more damage per execute at 5 targets, it doesn't account for the fact that Epidemic increases your shadow damage. And this means that it's, it ends up really tricky. So you have this kind of region, 5, 6, 7 targets, which is really not clear, and it depends on the situation. I think in general, I will start Epidemicing at around 6, unless there's proto damage where Death Call quite high up, maybe even up to 10 targets. If I want to have very even damage, for instance, the first boss in Floodgate, I would actually Epidemic there. Even though there's 5 targets, I kind of want to hit everything at the same time, and then I use Epidemic to do so. Hopefully that's clear. If you want a really simple answer, you can go, okay, just Epidemic at 6, 7. That's it. But if you want a bit more nuance, think about the priority damage and so on. Okay, next question. When do I use the Apocalypse build in keys? I mentioned this before that I never do it. I think it's a tricky one, right? So Apocalypse build allegedly does more single target than you sim it. It's quite clear. It does more single target. Now I think it's a bit tricky in practice because what happens is that Apocalypse is desynced with Dark Transformation generally. So the general idea with Apocalypse in keys in AoE is that you use it to get runes back to kind of keep your vamp spam going. So you go into pool, you hit all your cooldowns, you start spamming your Vampiric Strike, you get a Scythe proc, you use that, and then you press Apocalypse, you get your runes back, and you keep using Vampiric Strike. Due to that, generally we have Apocalypse coming a couple seconds after transformation, and when you hit a boss, that desync is going to be a bit of an issue, and it's going to devalue Apocalypse. I don't know. I think it's a tricky one. I've tried out playing more Apocalypse, but like the difference is not so big that you kind of notice it. I don't know. It's hard to say. In general, you want to pick Apocalypse for more single target, but I feel like the keys I'm currently running, I'm just not running it at all, and avoiding that kind of headache of even having to think about it. That's my kind of take on it. But leave a comment down below. Do you disagree? If so, why? Have you felt like Apocalypse gives you a lot more single target? Let me know. All right, so next question. What do I do when Blood Beast spawns? I've seen these loads of times. All right, so the question is generally, right? I proc Blood Beast. How do I optimize it so that it deals the most damage? Now, luckily for us, in general, we very much play with maximizing our damage per button press anyway, so it's not like we're going to treat it differently. We need to consider, right? Part of the reason why you're hitting Vampiric Strike so much is because it procs Blood Beast, right? There's some value from the Blood Beast coming into the Vampiric Strike, so if we proc it, Vampiric Strike is going to be slightly devalued. This is true. Now, what kind of effect does it have? I think on really, really big pools, we're talking like 16, 70 mobs, it means that you're going to hit Epidemic with a higher priority. But like in general, I don't do anything different. You're still going to mainly hit Vampiric Strike. The thing is, Vampiric Strike in itself does a ton of damage, and it also bursts wounds, which also deal lots of damage, right? So it's not like you go away from Vampiric Strike as soon as you proc Blood Beast, because only a small portion of the value from Vampiric Strike actually coming from the fact that we proc Blood Beast off it. I hope that makes sense. All right, next one. Do I care about overcap and ruining power? And how do I prioritize Vampiric Strike versus Epidemic / Death Call? So in Myth class, you don't really care about overcapping ruining power in AoE specifically. So how it works is that you want to prioritize hitting as many Vampiric Strikes as possible. That's going to be like your number one priority almost. When you get Sudden Doom procs, you're then going to use your ruining power spender, all right, over Vampiric Strike. In reality, you are obviously going to weave in some Death Calls and Epidemic, depending on the target count, right? Because you don't have the runes available to just spam Vampiric Strike the entire pool. So there's going to be some weaving involved. However, the amount of rune power you have should not affect your decision here. So yeah, you only really hit Epidemic and Death Call if one, you get Sudden Doom proc, or two, you're running out of runes. And that means that you want to prioritize hitting that to kind of generate, because you can't hit Vampiric Strike anyway. I think in general how it works is that, oh yeah, this is a good example. If you have to move away from the pack, you would obviously start using Epidemic or Death Call. Furthermore, when you use Festering Scythe, that consumes so many runes, you have to use rune power spenders because there's no runes available for you to use Vampiric Strike. And then finally, the last case is kind of like when your Defile runs out, you can prioritize to use your rune power spenders to essentially delay the next Defile. This is useful on like really long pulls because you need to get better Defile overlap. Essentially, you kind of take the opportunity when your Defile isn't down to kind of press Death Call because then you don't lose out on cleaving and pick strikes. All right. By the way, this boss is has a very good tip for us DKs. So you can see this debuff I have, the corruption one. If I use AMS, so how it works, right? It goes on a player, and then after a couple of seconds, it jumps on the closest one, and you're supposed to kind of allocate it to different people in the group because you get 2 stacks, you're kind of going to die essentially. However, if you have AMS active, when it jumps on you, it just goes away. So every second one, you can pop AMS, run to the guy that has it, and then let it jump on you, and it's going to go away, which is really nice and useful. All right, next one. When do I reapply my dots? I think this is a valid question because we don't talk about it that much. So you might notice that my Blood Plague and Frost Fever are going to drop multiple times, and I really don't care. They obviously they do some damage, and they increase your damage through the morbidity talent, but we're not going to waste a GCD reapplying them. How it works, right, is that you're going to use Dark Transformation, that's going to apply your dots, and then during a Dark Transformation window, you're going to hit Vampiric Strike, they're going to extend those dots, right? So you're never going to have to reapply them. Until Dark Transformation finishes, at that point, your next Scourge Strike will consume all the dots, and then you're going to reapply. And that's pretty much the only case where you apply dots manually. Some cases, if you're kind of chain pulling and you don't have Dark Transformation ready, you can also use Outbreak to reapply them, but otherwise, it's only going to be after DT. That's the only kind of scenario. In single target, it's kind of the same. It works very much in a similar manner. You have DT, it's going to extend your dots, you're going to consume them afterwards, you're going to reapply them, and then that's going to last you until next DT, and you're going to be good to go. All right. We talked about this, how big is the Blood Beast nerf? I didn't say though, single target's like 1%. So it's quite small and nothing to worry about, I'd say. And it's a fair nerf. I'd much rather they actually do this kind of tuning frequently, so that if there's another class that's out of tune essentially, they actually fix that. So I don't mind that they actually nerf us because it was fair, and it means that they're going to do that frequently moving forward. All right, next one. So why is my Blood Beast not proccing as much? This is interesting because I see this all the time that people go, oh, I don't blight Blood Beast, I'm always so unlucky, I never get procs, and so on and so on. There's definitely a confirmation bias there that you kind of only notice getting bad procs when you get the bad procs, and it kind of, even though you usually get relatively good ones, you discount those in memory. In general, though, the actual reason is because you're not hitting Vampiric Strike enough. That's by far the most common one. I see people that, if they complain that their damage is low from Blood Beast, it's because they're not hitting Vampiric Strike enough. And that means they're not proccing them as often. And then that's the whole kind of issue with it. So I would say if you look in your damage breakdown, you go like, Blood Beast is very low, make sure you're actually using your Vampiric Strikes enough. All right, next one. Why is my single target so low, and how do I do well on single target? This is also a very common one. People, they feel like they do well on AoE, and then they head up single target, and they don't feel like they perform as well. I think this is due to several things. One of them is obviously maybe not doing the single target rotation correctly, but also the fact that when you're playing Unholy at the moment, your AoE is just incredibly good. And that means if you're mediocre at doing AoE, you're still going to do really good AoE. It's like, you're probably not going to notice that you're not doing that well because Unholy does so much damage anyway. And you really only notice when you're a single target, when it's much more clear. Like if you're doing rotation correctly and if you're doing good damage. So I think that's one of the effects. And it's essentially the fact that Unholy is really good in AoE. And that might make it feel bad if you, as soon as you go single target, because if you're not doing that well overall, that's really going to show in single target. It could also be that you're not doing your rotation single target correctly, so I'm going to give some pointers. I think the main bits about single target is one, handling your dark transformation windows correctly, and also like the in between the dark transformation, which obviously covers the entire fight. All right. One thing to also remember, when your DT is active, don't press any other button except Vampiric Strike and Death Call. And also make sure to prioritize Death Call. Like it hits so hard. So that's going to be number one button. This means that you're not going to use things like Defile or Festering Strike or Outbreak, or nothing else, right? It's only going to be Vampiric Strike and Death Call. And All Assault does come into play here because we generally do delay that a little bit to get better overlap with our burst. But other than that, that's going to be a big thing. If you're pressing other buttons, you're going to lose a lot of single target DPS. I think secondly, what you do after your DT window does actually matter. So what I tend to do is as soon as DT finishes, right, you're going to do first thing, consume your dots. Number one. Second thing, put up your dots again. Next thing is pop down Defile and hit Festering Strike. And then, only then, you can consume any Sudden Doom procs you have. Right? The reason around this is all about trying to generate more Vampiric Strike procs. Outside of DT, you get Vampiric Strike procs from your death calls, and you get higher probability of getting those if you're standing in your Defile. So you kind of want to set up your wounds so that you don't lose out on value from hitting Sudden Doom procs on 0 wounds, one thing. But you also want to get your Defile down so that your Sudden Dooms are going to proc Vampiric Strikes more often. That's going to deal more damage, extend your gift window, and you're going to be all to go. No, sorry. Is it gifted as in lane? I always say it incorrectly. It's the haste buff, right, that you extend. Once you've done that, you can just continue on your single target rotation until you hit your next Dark Transformation window. We're going to hit Dark Transformation and just only spam Vampiric Strike and Death Call. Very important thing, like it's very different here. So in AoE, you prioritize Vampiric Strike. In single target, it's going to prioritize in Death Call. You really don't want to overcap rune power on single target, whereas in AoE, it doesn't matter. But you kind of need to get used to the difference there. All right, 2 more questions. When do I use Festering Strike in AoE? So this is a bit of a controversial topic. I don't think everyone agrees on this, but me personally, I never press Festering Strike in AoE. Only Festering Scythe when I get that proc. And that's going to use immediately. Festering Strike just does such a good amount of damage. It both gives you lots of wounds, but like raw damage wise, it's just really, really powerful button. So that's something I can press. But otherwise, I never press Festering Strike. Like if you're running Vile Contagion, things you might do that, but you don't do that with the current build generally. So I just go by the fact that in AoE, I just think about Festering Strike and I go, that's not on my boss. I don't press that. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe in a specific scenario it works. The thing is that it costs a lot of resources, 2 runes, which means that you were going to use Vampiric Strike less. And also, you kind of don't have time for it. Using that Fetching Strike means that you're cleaving on Vampiric Strike much less. It means that you're doing other things. Yeah, it restricts the other things, so I don't think it's worthwhile. All right, final one. Do we use the Defile single target move class? Yes, we do. I think the primary 2 places you do it is 1, just after your DT finishes, and 2, just before your next window. Very easy to follow. It means that, you get a nice overlap in this like mid period between your DTs, gives you high probability of proccing Epic Strike, which gives you more damage and extends your buff window. And then using it just before means that you get this nice haste buff. And then also deals damage, which is nice. But that's how you could use it, and it's quite simple to follow. So just before DT and then just after, and you're good to go. All right, so those were all the questions I had noted down. Thank everyone that actually helped me out and asked those. We haven't really done a lot of commentary in the run here, except that trick with the AMS. We're doing quite well here. We are on the final boss. I think this important bit here is that we're going to bloodlust this, and it's going to be bloodlusting during the phase where the shield is down. Which means that I want my cooldowns there, but it's going to be fine because it's going to take like 45 seconds. Just a couple other things that I just thought about, some tips and tricks. So extending your haste buff from your Sun lane is quite important. So when you do go in between packs, it can be a good idea to kind of, send some death calls as the tank pulls ahead of you. And that's not going to pull any aggro, and it's going to give you likelihood of proccing a big strike, which you're going to use to extend your window before you go into your burst. Going to a burst with 7 stacks, it's such a big difference from starting out at 0. So that's a very important thing to think about. You might also see me sometimes that I press my DT a bit early, and just to get that extension of the window. I don't really care if I lose like a second, as long as I can keep my stacks going. That's another important thing. All right, this fight is quite straightforward, by the way. You kind of just standing in your spot. When you get the circle, you move until this rock and make sure it doesn't spawn. As I said, here we go, we got the burst window. I'm just going to pop all my cooldowns, and we're going to try and get the boss down as much as possible. He takes increased damage here, which is another reason why we save our cooldowns for it. But obviously, we also want to save the cooldown for the bloodlust to kind of synergize them. Pure single target, you can see I'm half prioritizing Death Call here, and that's also going to do a ton of damage. All right. I'm trying to think if there was some other thought I had. It's mostly the fact that after your DT window finishes, it's really nice to use a Fetching Strike to make sure you have some wounds up when you actually do get those Sudden Doom procs and so on. And then as soon as you get a Vampiric Strike, you're going to use that ASAP. I think another piece of thing that you can optimize is that like when you go into a DT window and single target, it is ideal if you have a Sudden Doom proc. You deal so much more damage with Sudden Doom during DT. So obviously it crits and DT increases damage of your death goal, so that's why it works well. So that's something you can aim for. But it's not something like you should really try and sit on, because you don't want to over cap on the Sudden Doom procs either. However, as I said, if you're sitting in one Sudden Doom proc, and you can choose from if you can spend that or hit DT and then spend it, you definitely want to hit DT first. All right, boss is going down quite nicely. You can see here again, just what I talked about, Defile, and then we go into the burst window. The actual location of Unholy Assault is something I'm not quite sure about. Generally, it's fine to use it after DT because you want it to overlap well with your burst. I think that's general why, but you don't need to like delay it a lot. In Raid, you do delay Unholy Assault, especially in the opener, to get better overlap, but that's also because our Dark Transformation windows are much longer in Raid. In AoE, we don't press Ruining Power Spenders as much, which means that our Dark Transformation windows are a bit shorter, and that means that the location of Unholy Assault can be a bit closer to Dark Transformation, if that makes sense. All right. I must say, playing Unholy is so nice at the moment. I quite like how it plays, but importantly, it's so easy to get invited to groups. We are literally meta in Myth class, right? The highest keys are done with Unholy because we just do so much damage. And importantly, we also do well like 2-target cleave. If you played like the Floodgate second boss, Unholy is topping the damage because we just do really well when there's 2 targets because our death calls hit so damn hard. So you get like the best of both worlds at every single pool. We can expect to kind of be top DPS. All right, if you guys thinking that there's been lots of Unholy content, yes, it's true. I will try and do some more Frost stuff. Obviously, it's going to be after Easter. I won't have time before that. But I think Frost is going to be a bit better. Like already, Frost does really well. Like, don't get me wrong. I think the only reason we don't see it play more is because Unholy is just insane. But Frost is really close, and Frost also does better on single target, which has a bit more balanced damage profile. So maybe after the buffs to Unholy was the buff to Frost, we'll maybe see a bit more. Anyway, that's my weekly whatever. If you guys saw the last one, just chat about stuff. Hopefully that's useful. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought about this video. Upvote, downvote, consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.